database engine, and then the server, we need to provide the server name. If it is a if it is a remote server, we usually have the IPs or the named instances that we can provide here. And right now it's in local instance, right? So we, for a local instance, we can provide the server name as three various types. One as in as your computer name. You can see my computer name is, device name is desktop srpc 62D. So that is what it shows here. And now in the authentication, as we have mentioned, like we do have Windows authentication, SQL Server authentication, and there are a lot of Active Directory authentications. So right now my database SQL Server instance is being configured with the both. That means Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. I'm selecting the Windows authentication and was trying to connect. So as I do have the Windows authentication, it was successfully connected to the local instance of database server. Okay, so what is the other way? The password for now, but the other way would be the SQL server authentication, where we provide the login and the password things. So usually the applications will have the username and password strategy of authentication, right? So that type of authentication is called as SQL Server authentication. We will have a particular username and a password. As I mentioned, we can, for a local instance especially, we can point to the server name as different ways, right? One is the computer name, the other one is dot. So though I give dot, it is connected to the same instance. Okay, the another way is you can mention as local host. Okay, so whatever the name that we give for the local instance, whether it is a localhost or dot or the mission name, will point to the same instance. Now you might get whether we can have multiple instances in a mission. Yeah, for sure. In a single mission, if you want to install n number of SQL Server instances, we can do that. Instance is nothing but a different server. So right now it's a default instance. It is named as MS SQL Server by default. Any SQL Server version you do install, like whether 2014, 16, 19, 2022, whatever it is, the default instance name is like MS SQL Server. So is it the only way that we can connect to the database using the IDE? No. Whatever the SQL, whatever the relational database it is, we can use a legacy way using the command prompt to connect to the SQL. Either it be Oracle, either it be Sybase, or either it be anything. For sure, if it is a relational database, there should be a way that we can connect to the database server using the command prompt. I'll not use much on the command prompt, but I will just show that we can connect and do some querying there as it is a demonstration. So we can use, we can open the command prompt, and the command to connect for the SQL server is SQL cmd SQL command -s. -s stands for server name. Now we need to provide the server instance name. As I mentioned, the default instance name is MS SQL Server. Now we can see that it's been connected successfully. So I will try to execute some command and see whether we were able to query something or not. So I'm writing a select query, select name from sys. I want to see what are the list of databases that are available in this particular server. So I was executing the command sys.databases. So once you provide the command to execute those sequence of commands, you need to write a go statement, so it will understand this is the batch, end of the batch, and I need to execute. Oops, I think I should not provide the semicolon. See, we have got the result set, the name, which states all the databases in this server. These are the list of databases that are available in this server. 8 databases. We can query the same here. You can see whether we are getting the same result or not. See, we got 8 rows and it is none other than the same. By default, when you install a SQL Server instance, you will have some default databases which like master, tempdb, model, and msdb. We will not much bother about these things, but I will give you a glimpse in going forward in further sessions. Like master is a database where it holds all the definitions of the like system related things, and tempdb is the database where it holds the temporary things. Like we do have something called as temporary tables, where we'll use them to create them, and those will be exist only till the session is active. So we'll see much deep in the further sessions, but all those temporary things will be created in the temporary database. So we'll not bother about these things much here, but we will see a little things. What do those exist? That is it. Now coming back to the slides, we'll see we are done with the SQL Server introduction, and we have seen what is an IDE, how do we connect to the SQL Server, and we have seen different various connection nodes. Now we will see a little bit on the SQL Server. So though we do have SQL, which is a generic thing for the relational database management system, each company have written their own programming capabilities on top of that basic SQL. Okay, Microsoft and Sybase together developed the extension of SQL and named it as T-SQL, which is abbreviated as Transact SQL. And when it comes to the Oracle, it is called as PL SQL, Programming Language SQL. So various companies, uh, for sure, the basic fundamentals, the basic funda of the SQL will be retained, like having those tables, having those relationships, having the keys, primary keys, and foreign keys, having the views, having the basic set of database objects is common across the different databases, relational databases. But on top of that, there was some extension that they have done on their own. Likewise, we will not see the stored procedures in some databases. They will call only functions are the only things that some databases might have, and in some databases there might be no triggers available. So there will be no much query in some database, some relational databases. There might be no magical tables. So yeah, the things might vary. The basic concepts like transaction management, having the database objects like schema, databases, views, functions, all those things will be in common across the relational databases, but the extension might vary between the database and database. So the advantage of learning SQL is, if you learn SQL, like though you learn SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, you wouldn't take much time to play with the other relational databases. Why? Because the SQL, which is fundamental of any of the database, any of the relational databases, is common for across the relational database. So that is the reason if you learn SQL Server or MySQL or any of the relational database, it will be a cakewalk to play with the rest of the relational databases. And the advantage of learning SQL Server is there is an cloud instance of SQL Server which is called as an Azure SQL, which is so close to the SQL Server. If you learn SQL Server, you can, for sure, you can confidently say that you can also work on Azure SQL. Why? Because there are only some limitations, like we can't cross query across the databases in the SQL Server instance. Going forward, we'll see like what is cross querying, what is a fully qualified object name of a table, or a database object. So there will be some limitations that we can't do cross querying in Azure SQL. I do have little experience on Azure SQL as well. That's the reason I was stating that there are some limitations over there. Coming